In the small, dusty town of Crestwood, Montana in 1892, a train pulled into the station with a screech of brakes and a cloud of smoke. Among the passengers stepping off was Clara Bennett, a young woman clutching her infant son, Samuel, tightly to her chest. At just 22 years old, Clara had already faced more challenges than most people twice her age. Widowed at 19, she had been left alone to care for her baby, without any family or support system to lean on. Clara had placed an ad in a matrimonial newspaper, hoping to find a husband who could provide stability and a better future for her and Samuel. The idea of becoming a mail-order bride wasn't easy to swallow, but she didn't have many other options. So, after months of correspondence, she boarded a train heading west, full of hope that this decision would lead to a new beginning. When Clara stepped onto the platform, she expected warmth, acceptance, and maybe even excitement from the man she'd been promised to. Instead, what greeted her were cold stares and whispers behind cupped hands. Harold Griggs, the wiry rancher she'd come all this way to meet, stood there with his arms crossed over his chest, his face twisted into a scowl as he took in the sight of Clara and her baby. He hadn't known about Samuel when they exchanged letters. He assumed Clara was a simple spinster looking for companionship. But now, seeing her with a child, he felt betrayed. "Who is this?" Harold snapped, pointing at the bundle in Clara's arms. His tone was sharp, laced with anger and disappointment. Clara tried to explain, her voice trembling as she told him about Samuel and how she'd mentioned having a child in one of her earlier letters. But Harold wasn't listening. To him, Clara wasn't what he had hoped for, a wife who could help around the farm and bear him children. Instead, she came with baggage he wasn't willing to take on. Without another word, Harold turned his back on her and walked away, leaving Clara stranded on the platform. She stood there frozen, holding her sleeping baby close, feeling utterly humiliated. Tears welled up in her eyes as reality hit her like a ton of bricks. She had traveled hundreds of miles, leaving behind everything familiar, only to be rejected. Within minutes of arriving, what was she supposed to do now? Go back home? There was no home to go back to. As Clara sat down on her trunk, tears streaming down her cheeks, she noticed a figure standing nearby. It was a tall man dressed in fine leather boots and a tailored coat. His broad shoulders and confident stance made him stand out from the crowd. But it was his eyes that caught Clara's attention, piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through her, filled with both curiosity and compassion. This was Ezra Calloway, one of the wealthiest landowners in the county. Known for keeping to himself, Ezra rarely interacted with anyone outside his ranch. Yet here he was, watching Clara with an expression that suggested he might actually care. Ezra approached her cautiously, tipping his hat as he stopped a few feet away. "Ma'am," he said, his deep voice calm and steady. "Are you all right?" Clara hesitated, unsure whether to trust this stranger. After the day she'd had, accepting kindness from anyone felt risky. But desperation won out. She wiped her tears and nodded weakly. I don't know what to do," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I'd found a place here, but—" Ezra listened patiently as Clara explained her situation. When she finished, he offered her a solution she hadn't anticipated. "You can stay at my ranch for a while," he said simply, "until you figure things out." Clara blinked in surprise. "Why would you do that?" she asked, suspicion creeping into her tone. Ezra shrugged. "Because everyone deserves a second chance," he replied. "And because I've got plenty of room." For a moment, Clara considered refusing. Relying on the generosity of a stranger felt wrong, especially after everything that had happened. But then she looked down at Samuel, who stirred slightly in her arms. She knew she couldn't turn down the offer, not if it meant giving her son a safe place to sleep tonight. With a heavy heart, Clara agreed. Little did she know this decision would set her on a path she never could have imagined. As Ezra helped her load her belongings onto his wagon, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to happen. Maybe this rejection wasn't the end of her story. It might just be the beginning of something far greater. For Ezra, too, This encounter marked a turning point, though he didn't realize it yet. Meeting Clara would change his life in ways he never expected. For years, he had kept people at arm's length, building walls around his heart after losing his wife and unborn child. But something about Clara's quiet strength and determination stirred something deep inside him. Whether he liked it or not, he was drawn to her, and to the tiny boy nestled in her arms. As the wagon rumbled toward the Calloway ranch, neither Clara nor Ezra could foresee the twists and turns their lives were about to take. All they knew was that fate had brought them together, and for now, that was enough. Life at the Calloway ranch was unlike anything Clara had ever experienced. The sprawling property stretched as far as the eye could see, with rolling fields dotted by grazing cattle and sturdy barns standing tall against the Montana sky. It was beautiful, but it also felt intimidating, like stepping into a world she didn't belong in. Ezra had welcomed her warmly enough, showing her to a cozy guest room where she and Samuel could stay, but there was an undeniable distance between them. He wasn't unkind exactly, but he carried himself with a quiet reserve that made Clara hesitant to ask too many questions or impose on his routines. The first few days were awkward. Clara spent most of her time caring for Samuel, trying not to make waves while figuring out how things worked around the ranch. Ezra kept busy overseeing his workers and tending to his livestock, often disappearing early in the morning and returning late in the evening covered in dust and sweat. Their interactions were polite but brief, a nod here, a good morning there. Clara began to wonder if coming to the ranch had been a mistake. Maybe Ezra regretted offering her shelter. Maybe she'd overstayed her welcome. But then something unexpected happened. Samuel started breaking down the walls Ezra had built around himself. It began innocently enough. One afternoon, while Clara was folding laundry on the porch, Samuel crawled over to where Ezra sat reading a newspaper. The little boy giggled and reached out, grabbing onto Ezra's boot. Startled, Ezra looked down at the chubby fingers clutching his leather footwear. For a moment, he just stared, unsure what to do. Then, almost instinctively, he leaned forward and scooped the baby into his arms. Clara froze, watching nervously from the corner of her eye. She hadn't expected Ezra to be so gentle or so natural with her son. But as Samuel babbled happily and tugged at Ezra's shirt collar, a rare smile spread across the cowboy's face. It was small, barely noticeable, but it lit up his entire demeanor. From that day on, Samuel became a regular fixture in Ezra's life. Whether it was playing peekaboo during breakfast or toddling after him as he checked the fences, the baby brought a kind of joy to the ranch that had been missing for years. Slowly but surely, Clara noticed changes in Ezra. He started joining her and Samuel for meals more often, lingering longer at the table even after finishing his food. At first, their conversations were superficial, weather updates, comments about the ranch. But over time, they grew deeper. Clara found herself opening up about her late husband, sharing stories of their short life together and the struggles she faced raising Samuel alone. To her surprise, Ezra listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and offering words of encouragement when she needed them most. For his part, Ezra rarely spoke about his own past. But one evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, he let his guard down just enough to share a piece of himself. "I lost my wife 5 years ago," he said quietly, staring off into the horizon. She died giving birth to our child. Neither of them made it." Clara's heart ached hearing those words. She reached out instinctively, placing a hand on his arm. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "That must have been unbearable." Ezra nodded, his jaw tight. "It was. I threw myself into work after that. Figured it was easier than dealing with the pain. But—" He paused, glancing down at Samuel, who was asleep in Clara's lap. "Seeing you and your boy, it reminds me of what I lost. And maybe what I still want." His confession hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Clara didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to pull away, to protect herself from getting hurt again. But another part, the part that had grown fond of Ezra's quiet strength and steady presence, told her to stay. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. As the days turned into weeks, their bond continued to grow. Ezra taught Clara how to ride a horse, patiently guiding her through the basics until she felt confident enough to explore the ranch on her own. In return, Clara introduced him to the simple pleasures of baking bread from scratch and singing lullabies to Samuel before bedtime. Together, they created a rhythm that felt comfortable, natural, even hopeful. But not everyone in Crestwood saw their arrangement in such a positive light. Whispers followed Clara whenever she ventured into town, fueled by gossip mongers who delighted in spreading rumors about her motives. Some claimed she was using her son to manipulate Ezra into marriage. Others accused her of being a gold digger, preying on a wealthy man's loneliness. The accusations stung, especially since Clara knew none of them were true. Still, she tried to ignore the whispers, focusing instead on building a new life for herself and Samuel. One day, however, the weight of judgment became too much to bear. Clara had gone to the general store to pick up supplies when she overheard two women talking, behind her back. "Can you believe she thinks she can just waltz in and take over Calloway's ranch?" One of them sneered. "Poor man doesn't stand a chance." Clara's cheeks burned with embarrassment. She paid for her items quickly and hurried back to the wagon, tears threatening to spill over. When she returned to the ranch, she found Ezra sitting on the porch whittling a piece of wood. Seeing the distress on her face, he immediately set the knife aside and stood up. "What's wrong?" he asked, concern etched into his features. Clara hesitated, unsure how much to tell him. Finally, she blurted out, "I think I should leave." Ezra frowned. "Leave? Why?" "Because of me being here," she explained, gesturing vaguely toward the town. "People are saying terrible things about us, about me. I don't want to bring shame on you or ruin your reputation." Ezra stepped closer, his expression firm. "Clara," he said firmly, "you're not leaving. Not because of some idle gossip. You and Samuel belong here. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." His words gave her pause. For the first time since arriving in Crestwood, Clara allowed herself to consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she deserved happiness. That maybe Ezra truly cared for her, not out of pity, but because he saw something worth fighting for. And so, despite the challenges ahead, Clara decided to stay. Little did she know, this decision would lead to a love story neither of them could have predicted, one that would test their courage, resilience, and faith in each other. The decision to stay at the ranch wasn't an easy one for Clara. Every day brought its own set of challenges: whispers in town, judgmental stares, and the occasional snide comment from someone who thought they knew better. But what weighed on her most was the growing bond between her and Ezra. She couldn't deny the warmth that filled her chest whenever he smiled at her, or the way his voice softened when he spoke to Samuel. Yet, with every passing moment, she felt more conflicted. Was it fair to let herself grow closer to him when their lives were so different? Could she really trust that this fragile connection wouldn't crumble under the weight of society's disapproval? Ezra, too, was wrestling with his own doubts. For years, he had built walls around his heart, convinced that love only led to pain. Losing his wife and child had left scars that ran deep, and he'd sworn never to open himself up to that kind of hurt again. But Clara was changing everything. Her quiet strength, her unwavering dedication to Samuel, and the way she seemed to understand him without needing words. It all made him question whether he could truly go back to the life he'd lived before. Still, fear lingered in the corners of his mind. What if he failed her? What if history repeated itself? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Clara found herself sitting alone on the porch. Samuel was asleep inside, and Ezra had gone to check on the cattle. The ranch was quiet except for the distant chirping of crickets and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. It should have been peaceful, but Clara's thoughts were anything but calm. She thought about the letter she'd received earlier that week, a distant relative offering her shelter in another state. At first she'd dismissed it, thinking there was no reason to leave Crestwood now that she had found a semblance of stability. But as the gossip intensified and the pressure mounted, the idea began to take root in her mind. Maybe leaving would be the best thing, not just for her but for Ezra too. He didn't deserve to carry the burden of scandal because of her presence. She cared for him too much to let that happen. With a heavy heart, Clara made up her mind. She would pack her things tonight, slip away before dawn, and head to the train station. It was selfish to think she could stay here any longer, risking Ezra's reputation and happiness. As tears welled in her eyes, she began gathering her belongings quietly, careful not to wake Samuel. The house was dark, save for the faint glow of moonlight streaming through the windows. Each item she packed felt like another nail in the coffin of the life she'd started to build. But just as she finished tying the last knot on her trunk, she heard footsteps behind her. Startled, she turned to see Ezra standing in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the dim light from the hallway. His expression was unreadable, but the tension in his stance told her he already knew what she was doing. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice low but steady. Clara froze. Caught red-handed, I'm leaving, she stammered, clutching the edge of her shawl tightly. "It's for the best." "For who?" Ezra demanded, stepping closer. There was no anger in his tone, just raw emotion that made Clara's breath catch in her throat. "For me? For you? Or for those busybodies in town who don't know the first thing about us?" "I can't keep dragging you into this," Clara insisted, her voice breaking. "They're tearing you apart because of me. Your business is suffering, people are talking, I can't let it go on." "And what about us?" Ezra shot back, his piercing blue eyes locking onto hers. "Do you really think running away will fix anything? Do you think I care about what they say? Clara, I've spent 5 years shutting everyone out because I was afraid of getting hurt again. And then you came along, with your courage, your kindness, your boy, and you reminded me what it means to live, to feel something real." Tears streamed down Clara's face as she listened, her resolve crumbling with every word. "But what if I'm not enough?" she whispered, voicing the fear that had haunted her since the day she arrived in Crestwood. "What if I mess this up?" Ezra closed the distance between them, reaching out to gently cup her face in his hands. "You're already more than enough," he said softly. "Don't you see that? You've brought light back into this place, into my life. I'm not letting you go, not because of fear, not because of rumors, not for anything." For a long moment, they stood there, the air thick with unspoken promises and emotions neither of them had dared to name until now. Finally, Clara nodded, leaning into his touch. "Okay," she murmured. "I'll stay." Relief washed over Ezra's face, and he pulled her into a tight embrace, holding her as though he never intended to let go. In that moment, something shifted between them. The barriers they'd both erected, the doubts, the fears, the insecurities began to crumble, replaced by a newfound sense of hope and trust. The next morning, Clara woke up feeling lighter than she had in weeks. Samuel gurgled happily in his crib, completely unaware of the storm that had passed during the night. As she prepared breakfast, she couldn't help but smile when Ezra walked into the kitchen, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. "We need to talk about something," he said, taking a seat at the table. "About us." Clara paused, her heart skipping a beat. "What do you mean?" Ezra hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "I don't want there to be any confusion about why you're here. You're not just staying out of obligation or convenience. I want you to know, you and Samuel, you belong here. With me." His declaration sent a wave of warmth through Clara, but it also sparked a new concern. "And what happens if things don't work out?" she asked cautiously. "If we try and fail, then we deal with it together," Ezra replied firmly. "No running, no hiding, just honesty. That's all I ask." Clara nodded, feeling a surge of determination. They were taking a leap of faith, trusting that their bond was strong enough to withstand whatever challenges lay ahead. And while the ETE road wouldn't be easy, they faced it side by side, two broken souls finding solace in each other. As the days passed, their relationship deepened. Ezra started teaching Clara more about running the ranch, showing her how to mend fences, feed the livestock, and even handle accounts. In return, Clara introduced him to the joys of baking pies and reading bedtime stories to Samuel. Together, they created a rhythm that felt natural, blending their strengths and supporting each other's weaknesses. But just as they began to settle into this new dynamic, trouble came knocking once again. Harold Griggs, the man who had rejected Clara upon her arrival, hadn't forgotten about her, or the humiliation he felt when she chose to stay with Ezra instead of disappearing quietly. Determined to get revenge, he concocted a plan that would shake the foundation of their budding relationship and force them to confront their deepest fears. Little did Clara and Ezra know, their love was about to be tested in ways neither of them could have imagined. Harold Griggs wasn't the kind of man who let things go easily. Ever since Clara had arrived in Crestwood and been rejected by him, he'd harbored a simmering resentment toward her. And now, toward Ezra too. To Harold, it seemed like Clara had deliberately humiliated him by staying in town and aligning herself with one of the wealthiest men in the county. He couldn't stand the thought of her winning, while he looked like a fool. So, fueled by bitterness and pride, Harold hatched a plan to make sure Clara paid for embarrassing him. It started with rumors. At first they were subtle, whispers here and there about how Clara had manipulated Ezra into taking her in. But soon those whispers grew louder, spreading through the town like wildfire. People began speculating that Clara must have stolen money from Harold when she left his home after their disastrous meeting at the train station. It was a lie, of course, but lies often stick better than the truth, especially when people want to believe them. One afternoon, as Clara walked into the general store to pick up supplies, she felt the weight of stares pressing down on her. The shopkeeper avoided making eye contact, and two women standing near the counter exchanged knowing glances before turning away. Clara's stomach tightened. Something was wrong. She grabbed what she needed quickly and hurried to the counter, only to hear one of the women mutter under her breath, "Thief." Clara froze, gripping the edge of the counter so hard her knuckles turned white. Before she could respond, the shopkeeper handed her the bag of goods without saying a word. The message was clear. She wasn't welcome here anymore. Her cheeks burned with shame as she left the store, clutching the bag tightly. When she got back to the ranch, she tried to brush off the encounter, telling herself it didn't matter. But deep down, she knew it did. The next day, the situation escalated. A sheriff's deputy showed up at the Calloway ranch, holding a piece of paper in his hand. Clara's heart sank as Ezra greeted the man at the door. "What can I do for you?" Ezra asked, his tone polite but guarded. The deputy tipped his hat. "Sorry to bother you, Mr. Calloway, but we've received a complaint against Ms. Bennett here." He glanced at Clara, who stood frozen in place. "Seems someone claims she stole money during her time in town." Ezra's jaw tightened. "That's ridiculous," he said firmly. "Clara hasn't done anything wrong." "I understand," the deputy replied, holding up his hands defensively. "But we'll need her to come down to the station to answer some questions. Just procedure." Clara felt her world tilt. She wanted to protest, to explain that the accusation was baseless, but the words caught in her throat. All she could think about was how this would affect Ezra. Would people see him as foolish for standing by her? Would his reputation suffer because of her? "It's all right," Ezra said, stepping closer to her and placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll handle this together." The trip to the station was tense. Clara sat stiffly in the wagon beside Ezra, staring straight ahead as they drove into town. The stares followed her again, some curious, others hostile. By the time they reached the small wooden building that served as the sheriff's office, Clara's nerves were frayed. Inside, the sheriff greeted them with a mixture of sympathy and professionalism. "Ms. Bennett," he began, gesturing for her to take a seat. "There's been an accusation made against you regarding stolen funds. Do you have any idea why someone might say such a thing?" Clara shook her head, her voice trembling as she spoke. "I don't know where this is coming from. I haven't taken anything from anyone. The only person I met when I arrived was Harold Griggs, and he sent me away almost immediately. The sheriff nodded, jotting something down in his notebook. All right, we'll look into it further. In the meantime, I'd appreciate it if you stayed available should we need to speak with you again. As they left the station, Clara felt a wave of relief wash over her, but it was short-lived. Ezra's expression was grim as he helped her back into the wagon. This isn't over, he said quietly. Griggs is behind this. I'm sure of it. Back at the ranch, Ezra wasted no time taking action. He sent one of his trusted ranch hands into town to gather information, instructing him to find out exactly what Harold was up to. Meanwhile, Clara struggled to focus on anything else. Every sound outside made her jump, convinced that more trouble was coming. Samuel sensed her anxiety and clung to her leg, his big eyes filled with confusion. By evening, Ezra had pieced together enough to confirm his suspicions. Harold had fabricated the story about the stolen money, hoping to discredit Clara and drive a wedge between her and Ezra. Worse still, he planned to file a formal complaint, dragging Clara's name through the mud in front of the entire town. This ends now, Ezra declared, pacing the length of the living room. He's not going to ruin your life or ours. But what can we do? Clara asked, her voice tinged with desperation. If we fight back, won't it just make things worse? No, Ezra said firmly. If we let him get away with this, he wins, and I refuse to let that happen. The following morning, Ezra rode into town with Clara by his side. They headed straight to the courthouse where Ezra requested an immediate hearing to address the accusations against Clara. Word spread quickly, drawing a crowd of townsfolk eager to witness the drama unfold. As they took their seats inside the packed courtroom, Clara felt her heart pounding in her chest. The air was thick with tension and all eyes were on her. When the judge called the case to order, Harold stepped forward, smug and confident. He recounted his fabricated tale, painting Clara as untrustworthy and manipulative. The crowd murmured in agreement, clearly swayed by his words. Clara clenched her fists in her lap, fighting back tears. Then it was Ezra's turn to speak. Standing, tall, he addressed the court with unwavering conviction. Your Honor, he began, his voice steady and commanding. The accusations against Ms. Bennett are nothing more than lies designed to harm her reputation and mine. I have proof that Mr. Griggs is attempting to extort us both. With that, Ezra produced documents showing Harold's financial records, which revealed discrepancies that contradicted his claims. Additionally, several witnesses, including the shopkeeper who had initially shunned Clara, came forward to testify that they had never seen her act suspiciously. One by one, the pieces of evidence dismantled Harold's story, leaving him red-faced and flustered. By the end of the hearing, the judge dismissed the case entirely, chastising Harold for wasting the court's time. As they exited the courthouse, Clara felt a mix even though justice had been served. The ordeal left its mark. Many townsfolk still viewed Clara with suspicion, and Ezra's business suffered temporary setbacks as some clients distanced themselves. Yet, through it all, their bond only grew stronger. Together, they faced the challenges head-on, proving that love and trust could overcome even the harshest trials. In the quiet moments afterward, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Clara rested her head on Ezra's shoulder. We've come a long way, she murmured softly. Yes, Ezra replied, his voice thick with emotion. And every step was worth it. Their journey was far from over, but they faced the future with renewed hope, knowing they had each other. And that was more than enough. Even though the trial was over and justice had been served, life didn't magically return to normal for Clara and Ezra. The scars left by Harold Griggs' lies ran deep, both in the town's perception of them and in their own hearts. Gossip still lingered in Crestwood, whispered behind closed doors or muttered under breaths when Clara ventured into town. Some people refused to let go of their suspicions, no matter how many facts proved her innocence. And while Ezra stood firmly by her side, his business began to feel the ripple effects of the scandal. A few clients who had once relied on his cattle stopped placing orders, claiming they needed to reassess their partnerships. It was subtle sabotage, but it cut just as deeply. Clara noticed the toll it took on Ezra. He worked longer hours than ever before, pouring himself into the ranch as if trying to outrun the whispers that followed them. But she also saw something else, a quiet determination in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He wasn't going to let anyone drive them apart. Every time someone turned their back on him, he doubled down on what mattered most: his family. Clara and Samuel were no longer just guests at the Calloway Ranch. They were home. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Clara found Ezra sitting alone in the barn, leaning against a stack of hay bales. His hat was pulled low over his face and his shoulders sagged with exhaustion. She approached quietly, unsure whether to disturb him, but when she knelt beside him, he looked up and offered her a faint smile. "You've been working too hard," she said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "You can't keep carrying all this weight by yourself." Ezra sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's not about the work," he admitted. I hate seeing you hurt because of me. Because of us." Clara reached out, taking his hand in hers. "This isn't your fault," she said firmly. "None of this is. We didn't ask for any of it, but we're facing it together. That's what matters." Her words seemed to ease some of the tension in his frame, and he nodded, slowly. "You're right," he murmured. "We'll get through this together." As weeks turned into months, Clara and Ezra focused on rebuilding, not just their lives but their sense of belonging in Crestwood. They decided to take matters into their own hands, starting small but meaningful changes that would eventually win over even the harshest critics. Clara opened a schoolhouse on the ranch property, inviting local children to come and learn basic reading, writing, and arithmetic. At first, only a handful of families trusted her enough to send their kids, but word quickly spread about her patience and dedication. Soon the little classroom buzzed with laughter and learning, becoming a cornerstone of the community. Ezra, inspired by Clara's efforts, used his resources to fund projects that benefited the entire town. He repaired the old water pump near the center of Crestwood, ensuring fresh water flowed freely again. He donated supplies to help build a new roof for the church and organized a harvest festival that brought neighbors together for the first time in years. Slowly but surely, the walls of judgment began to crumble. People started to see Clara and Ezra not as outsiders or troublemakers, but as pillars of strength and generosity. Samuel grew into a bright, curious toddler, his giggles echoing through the ranch like music. He adored Ezra, following him everywhere and mimicking his every move. Whether it was stacking hay bales poorly or attempting to ride one of the gentlest horses, the boy brought light into every corner of their lives. For Ezra, watching Samuel grow felt like healing an old wound he hadn't realized still ached. He often found himself kneeling beside the boy, teaching him simple lessons about nature and kindness, marveling at how much joy such a tiny person could bring. Despite the progress they made, Clara still carried moments of doubt. Late at night, when the house was quiet and the stars glittered above, she sometimes wondered if staying in Crestwood had been the right choice. Could they ever truly escape the shadow of the past? Would people ever fully accept them? On those nights, Ezra always seemed to sense her unease. He'd wrap an arm around her and pull her close, holding her until the doubts faded. "You know," he said one night as they lay side by side, staring at the ceiling, "I never thought I'd want to share my life with anyone again. Not after—" He trailed off, his voice heavy with memories. "But then you came along. You reminded me what it means to hope, to believe in something better." Clara turned to look at him, her heart swelling with emotion. "And you gave me a reason to keep fighting," she replied. "For Samuel, for us, for everything we've built here." Their bond had transformed from tentative friendship to something unshakable. Love had taken root in the cracks of their broken pasts, growing stronger with each challenge they faced. Yet neither of them dared to name it aloud, not yet. There was still so much to prove, both to themselves and to the world around them. Then, one crisp autumn morning, Ezra surprised Clara with a question that caught her completely off guard. They were standing together on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Samuel played happily at their feet, chasing leaves blown by the breeze. "Clara," Ezra began, his voice steady but tinged with nervousness. "Do you remember when I told you that you and Samuel belonged here? With me?" She nodded, her brow furrowing slightly. "Of course. Well?" He hesitated, then dropped to one knee, pulling a simple silver ring from his pocket. "I meant it more than anything. Will you marry me?" For a moment, Clara couldn't breathe. Her mind raced, replaying everything they'd been through, the rejection, the rumors, the trials, and the triumphs. This man, this stubborn, kind, extraordinary man had chosen her, not despite her flaws or her circumstances, but because of them. Because she was exactly who she was. "Yes," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I'll marry you." Ezra slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling slightly as he stood and pulled her into a tight embrace. Samuel cheered from below, clapping his chubby hands as though he understood the significance of the moment. The three of them stood there together, bathed in the golden light of dawn, knowing their lives would never be the same. The wedding was simple but heartfelt, held beneath the wide Montana sky. Friends, neighbors, and even some former skeptics gathered to witness the union of two people who had defied odds and won. Clara wore a dress stitched with care by the women of the town, a symbol of forgiveness and acceptance. Ezra looked dashing in his best suit, his piercing blue eyes shining with pride as he watched Clara walk toward him. As they exchanged vows, promising to stand by each other through every storm and season, it was clear to everyone present that this love story was different. It wasn't built on fairy tales or perfect beginnings. It was forged in resilience, trust, and the unwavering belief that love could conquer even the hardest battles. When the ceremony ended, the celebration began. Laughter filled the air as music played and food was shared. Children danced barefoot in the grass while adults toasted to a brighter future. Clara and Ezra stood side by side, holding hands, their hearts full of gratitude. They had come a long way from the lonely train platform where their journey began. Through rejection, betrayal, and hardship, they had found each other, and in doing so they had discovered a love worth fighting for. Their story wasn't just about survival. It was about thriving, about creating a legacy of hope, compassion, and unity that would endure long after the echoes of gossip faded away. As the sun set on their special day, painting the horizon in fiery hues, Clara rested her head on Ezra's shoulder. "We've come a long way," she murmured, her voice soft but sure. "Yes," Ezra replied, pressing a kiss to her temple, "and every step was worth it." Their adventure was far from over, but whatever lay ahead, they would face it together, as husband and wife, as parents, and as partners in life. Years passed, and life at the Calloway Ranch became a testament to resilience, love, and the power of second chances. The once empty halls now echoed with laughter. Samuel's infectious giggles as he chased chickens in the yard, Clara's warm chuckle as she baked pies in the kitchen, and even Ezra's deep, rumbling laugh when Samuel tried and failed to teach him how to skip stones across the pond. What had once been a place of solitude and grief had transformed into a home filled with life, purpose, and joy. Clara threw herself into making the ranch a hub for the community. Her schoolhouse flourished, growing from a handful of students to nearly 20 eager children who came daily to learn. She taught them not just academics but also values like kindness, honesty, and perseverance. Many parents admitted that sending their kids to Clara's classes had changed their perspectives about her. They saw her dedication, her patience, and the way she treated every child, whether rich or poor, as equal. Slowly but surely, the lingering doubts about her character faded away, replaced by respect and admiration. Ezra, too, continued to use his influence to uplift those around him. He expanded his cattle operation, hiring more workers from Crestwood and ensuring fair wages and good working conditions. When a drought hit the region one summer, leaving several families struggling to feed their livestock, Ezra opened his pastures to share water and grazing land. It wasn't charity, it was partnership. He believed in lifting others up so they could stand on their own feet, and that belief earned him loyalty and trust. As Samuel grew older, he became the heart of the ranch. With his mop of curly hair and endless curiosity, he charmed everyone he met. Ezra took great pride in teaching him the ropes of ranch life, how to ride a horse, mend fences, and care for animals. But it wasn't just practical skills Samuel learned. Ezra instilled in him the importance of hard work, integrity, and treating people with respect. Watching father and son bond over these lessons brought tears to Clara's eyes. She often thought about how different Samuel's life might have been if fate hadn't led them to Ezra. This man, this remarkable man, had given her son something she never dreamed possible, a stable, loving family. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Challenges still arose, testing their strength and unity. One particularly harsh winter brought freezing temperatures and heavy snowfall, threatening the survival of both crops and cattle. Days turned into weeks as Ezra worked tirelessly alongside his crew, battling frostbite and exhaustion to keep the animals alive. Clara stayed up late into the nights, preparing hot meals and tending to anyone who fell ill. Samuel helped where he could, fetching blankets, carrying buckets of water, and keeping spirits high with his boundless energy. Through it all, they leaned on each other, drawing strength from their shared commitment to protect what they had built. By spring, when the snow melted and green shoots emerged from the thawed earth, the ranch and their bond was stronger than ever. They celebrated with a feast under the stars, inviting neighbors and friends to join them. As they danced and laughed together, Clara realized something profound. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were thriving. Their love story became legendary in Crestwork. People whispered about how Clara, rejected and alone, had found refuge in the arms of a lonely cowboy. How their union hadn't been easy, not at first, but had blossomed into something extraordinary. Some called it fate. Others called it determination. Clara and Ezra simply called it love. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, watching another Montana sunset, Clara rested her head on Ezra's shoulder. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" she asked softly. "All the time," Ezra replied, his voice thick with emotion. "When I look at you, at Samuel, at everything we've built here, I know I wouldn't trade it for anything." "Neither," Clara said, smiling. "Even with all the hardships, every moment has been worth it." Their journey hadn't ended with marriage or triumph over adversity. It was an ongoing adventure, one filled with ups and downs, joys and sorrows, but always anchored by their unwavering devotion to each other. Together, they faced whatever came their way, knowing they had the strength to overcome anything as long as they stood side by side. And so, the legacy of the Callaway Ranch continued to grow. Clara and Ezra's story inspired others in Crestwood to believe in the possibility of redemption, forgiveness, and new beginnings. Their home became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, light could break through if you dared to let it in. As the years rolled on, Samuel grew into a bright, confident young man. He followed in Ezra's footsteps, learning the intricacies of running the ranch while also embracing Clara's passion for education. On the day he graduated from the very schoolhouse his mother had founded, Clara and Ezra watched with tears in their eyes. It was a proud moment, not just for their family, but for the entire town. Standing there, surrounded by loved ones and friends, Clara felt a deep sense of peace. She had started her journey as a widow, with nothing but a baby and a desperate hope for a better future. Now she had a husband who cherished her, a son who adored her, and a community that respected her. Life wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was beautiful in its imperfection. That night, as she lay beside Ezra, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling down for the evening, Clara whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" Ezra asked, his voice sleepy but tender. "For giving me a home," she replied. "For believing in me when no one else did. For loving me." Ezra pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "The thanks is mine, Clara. You saved me too." In that quiet moment under the vast Montana sky, they knew they had found something rare and precious, a love that endured, a family that thrived, and a life worth living. And as sleep claimed them, their hearts remained full, grateful for every step of the journey that had brought them here. The end.